I used to have a perfect family, until I found out my husband was cheating and my son got involved in crime. I was devastated. Every night, I prayed to God, and He heard me. 3 years later, my husband came back asking for forgiveness, and my son was released early from prison with a restored soul. My name is Grace Walker, and not too long ago, I was convinced I was living the American dream. I had everything a woman could pray for. A husband, Eric, who wore crisp suits, paid the bills on time, and held my hand during Sunday service. A son, Tyler, tall, handsome, varsity quarterback, polite to his coaches and still gave me hugs in public. We lived in a quiet suburb outside of Dallas. White fence, porch swing, golden retriever named Max. I baked pies on weekends. We grilled steaks in the backyard on the 4th of July. Christmas was twinkle lights and cocoa, and Easter was pastels and praise music. I thought I was doing everything right. We prayed before dinner. We gave back to the church. I sent handwritten thank you cards. My friends at Bible study said I was the luckiest woman they knew. And deep down I believed it. Until the night that changed everything. It was an ordinary Tuesday. Eric was home late again. Said he had a client dinner. I was cleaning the kitchen, waiting for the dishwasher to finish, when I noticed his phone buzzing on the counter. Nothing out of the ordinary. I thought maybe it was Tyler texting about practice, so I picked it up, out of habit, out of love. And that's when I saw it. A message from someone named Jasmine. It read, "Still can't get last night out of my mind. I miss you already." I felt the blood drain from my face. My fingers shook as I opened the thread. There were photos, her, in my house, on my sheets, wearing the robe I bought him for our anniversary. My world didn't just crack, it split open. I stood there in the middle of my perfect kitchen and felt like I couldn't breathe. My heart was slamming against my ribs. I could hear the shower still running upstairs. My husband, my faithful, godly husband, was upstairs rinsing off another woman. I gripped the counter to keep from collapsing. Tears blurred my vision. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the phone against the wall, run upstairs, demand an answer. But I didn't. I just stood there, stunned, paralyzed. The man I had built a life with, the father of my child, had someone else. And he wasn't even hiding it well. How long? How many lies? How many nights had I prayed for this man while he was out sinning with someone who wasn't me? That night, I lay beside him in silence, pretending to sleep, while his betrayal pressed against my spine. I didn't confront him. I didn't cry. I just stared at the ceiling and whispered, "God, if you're still with me, I need you now." I thought that was the lowest point, but I had no idea. The real storm hadn't even begun. I didn't say a word. Not that night. Not the next day. Not for 3 whole weeks. For 21 nights, I laid beside the man who broke me, listening to his breathing, pretending to be asleep while silently begging God to hold me together. Every time he reached for me, I'd freeze. My body recoiled, but I forced myself not to pull away. I didn't want him to know I knew. Not yet. I was terrified, not just of losing him, but of losing everything I believed in. I needed time. I needed to understand. Why? Why her? Why now? Was I not enough? Was this marriage a lie from the beginning? I cleaned his laundry like nothing had changed. I cooked his meals. I kissed him goodnight, then turned to the wall and silently cried into my pillow. Sometimes I would stay up after he fell asleep, just staring at his back, wondering how he could look so peaceful while my world was on fire. I didn't confront him, because deep down, I was afraid the truth would finish me. If I said it out loud, it would become real. If I forced him to admit it, I'd never be able to unhear it. And then what? Divorce? Destroy our family? Break Tyler's heart? No, I wasn't ready. Instead, I clung to my faith like a lifeline. I prayed every single night, sometimes out loud, sometimes only in whispers. I asked God for strength. I asked him to change Eric's heart. I asked him to help me forgive a man who hadn't even apologized. But mostly, I asked him if he was still there. Because in that darkness, what scared me more than my husband's betrayal was the question echoing in my soul. Am I the only one left in this house who still believes in God? Just when I thought my heart couldn't shatter anymore, it did. It was a Friday night. I had just lit a candle in the living room, something I did lately to keep myself calm when the silence felt too loud. Eric was upstairs on the phone, probably with her. I didn't even bother listening anymore. And then came the knock. Not a friendly one. Not the kind neighbors give. No, This was cold, heavy, final. When I opened the door, there were 2 officers standing on my porch. Their faces were serious. My legs went numb. "Are you Grace Walker?" one of them asked. I nodded, barely able to breathe. "We have your son Tyler in custody. He's being charged with grand theft auto and possession of narcotics." I don't remember screaming, but I must have, because Eric came running down the stairs. My knees hit the floor. I grabbed the doorframe to keep from collapsing. I kept saying, "No, not my son, not my son. You must have the wrong boy. My Tyler's a good kid." But they didn't have the wrong boy. They let me see him before they took him away. And there he was, my baby, my sweet, church-going, football-playing, God-fearing boy, sitting in the back of a squad car with his wrists in handcuffs. His eyes met mine, but he didn't say a word. I wanted to tear the door off that car. I wanted to wrap him in my arms and scream at the whole world. Instead, I just stood there in the cold night, watching the flashing red and blue lights carry my son away from the life we built. I thought I had raised him right. I took him to Sunday school. I taught him to pray before bed, to say yes, ma'am, and to love God even when life wasn't fair. But now my son was a criminal. And I was a mother on her knees in the driveway, with the whole neighborhood watching, trying not to choke on the silence that followed when the sirens faded away. I didn't sleep that night. I just stared at the ceiling and whispered the only prayer I had left in me. "God, please, don't let this break me." After Tyler was taken and Eric barely looked at me for days, I did what most people would probably never understand. I didn't curse God. I didn't scream at the heavens or rip my Bible in half. I broke, but I didn't break away. That night, when the house was finally quiet, I sank to my knees right there in the middle of our cold kitchen floor. The tile chilled my skin, but I didn't move. I folded my hands and closed my eyes, and I started to pray. Not out of habit, not out of desperation, but because it was the only thing keeping me from falling apart completely. I prayed for Eric. I prayed for Tyler. I prayed for myself. "God," I whispered, my voice trembling, "I don't understand. I don't see the reason. But I still believe you're here, and I still believe you're good." Tears soaked the front of my shirt. I stayed there for what felt like hours, rocking back and forth, begging God to hold my family in his hands even though we were tearing at the seams. People talk about faith like it's something easy, like it's sunshine and answered prayers. But real faith? The kind you cling to when your husband's in love with someone else and your son's behind bars? That kind of faith burns. It refines you. It breaks you down so it can rebuild you. And that night on the floor, I told God, "Test me if you must, but I will not let go of you." I had lost my marriage. I had lost my son to a world I didn't recognize, but I hadn't lost my faith. Not then, not ever. The first letter came 2 weeks after Tyler was taken. I had prayed for it, waited by the mailbox like a soldier's wife waiting on news from war. When I saw his handwriting on the envelope, my heart skipped a beat. I thought maybe it would be the start of something. Maybe he'd say he missed me, that he was scared, that he needed prayer. But instead, he told me he hated me. He called me a fake. Said I'd pushed religion down his throat his whole life. Said my perfect little church world made him feel small. He told me to stop sending Bibles, stop talking to the prison chaplain, and stop praying for him, because, in his words, God doesn't live in here. I clutched the letter so tightly it crumpled in my hands. I couldn't breathe. It felt like my chest had been split open from the inside. That night, I cried harder than I had the night the cops took him, because nothing hurts more than being hated by the very soul you carried inside your own body. I sat alone on the edge of my bed, reading his words over and over until the ink blurred with my tears. My baby, my sweet boy, the one I rocked to sleep with lullabies and whispered prayers. Now he saw me as the enemy. But I didn't stop. Every morning after I dried my eyes and forced myself out of bed, I packed a small box with love, granola bars, socks, a devotional, and always, always a book about Jesus. Sometimes it was Psalms, sometimes a story of redemption, sometimes just a handwritten verse I prayed would one day crack the hard shell around his heart. I knew he threw them away. I knew he probably cursed my name with every delivery. But I believed that God's word doesn't return void. I believed that one day, maybe when he was alone and angry and tired of fighting, He'd open one of those books and hear something deeper than my voice. He'd hear God's. Because even when my son hated me, I never stopped loving him. And even when he rejected God, I never stopped believing that God hadn't rejected him. One morning, just like that, he was gone. No fight, no goodbye, no apology. Eric packed a suitcase while I was out buying groceries and left a single note on the counter. Don't make this harder than it already is. That was it. 23 years of marriage, reduced to a scribbled line and an empty closet. I remember standing in the doorway of our bedroom, looking at the space where his shoes used to be, and feeling like someone had torn the floor out from under me. I had just come back from visiting Tyler in county jail. He wouldn't speak to me. And now my husband had vanished without the decency of eye contact. Days later, I saw the photos. They were on Facebook, public for everyone to see. Eric and her smiling like they had just won the lottery, on a beach in Florida, holding hands in a vineyard, laughing in a hotel lobby like they didn't have a single regret in the world. It felt like someone had taken a dagger and twisted it in slow motion. Meanwhile, I was home alone, juggling overdue bills, crying into my coffee, fixing broken cabinet hinges by myself because I couldn't afford a handyman. I couldn't even afford to break down because there was no one left to pick me back up. And still, I prayed for them. I know how crazy that sounds. I was the abandoned wife, the humiliated mother. I had every right to be bitter. And trust me, there were nights I wanted to scream. Nights I wanted to drive to that woman's house and tell her exactly what kind of man she had stolen. But every time I knelt to pray, I heard something deeper than my anger. A still, quiet voice in my heart whispered, "Don't seek revenge. Don't curse them. Wait." And so I waited. I waited while they lived their dream life. I waited through the loneliness, through the pain, through the deafening silence of a house too quiet for comfort. And every night, I whispered the same broken prayer. God, if you're still writing this story, please turn the page soon. I didn't know how or when, but I believed, deep in my bones, that God wasn't done with me yet. And maybe, just maybe, he wasn't done with Eric either. That Christmas was the quietest of my life. No tree, no gifts, no smell of cinnamon rolls baking in the oven, no laughter from the hallway, no Eric, no Tyler, just me, a single candle, and the sound of the wind tapping against the kitchen window. I had never spent a holiday alone before. For 23 years, I played hostess. I hung the stockings. I wrapped the presents. I smiled for the pictures, even when I didn't feel like smiling. But that year, there was no pretending. No one to pretend for. I poured myself a cup of coffee, opened my old Bible, and sat on the living room floor beneath the empty mantel. No music, no lights, just silence. Heavy, aching silence. I thought the loneliness would crush me. But something happened I didn't expect. As I sat there reading the story of a baby born in a manger, forgotten by the world, surrounded by dirt and animals, I started to cry. Not out of sadness this time, but because I felt him. I truly felt him. God was there. In my little broken living room, in the quiet, in the stillness. Not just in theory. Not just in memory. He was present. I could almost hear him whisper, "You're not forgotten, Grace. You were never forgotten." I wept harder than I had in months, not because I was devastated, but because for the first time in so long, I felt held. I felt known. I felt loved in a way that no husband or child or friend could ever love me. That night, Christmas didn't feel like a loss. It felt like a beginning. A quiet, holy beginning. Because even though my world was still a mess, my heart was healing, slowly, softly. One candle, one verse, one tear at a time. The day my son said, "Mom, I found God in prison." After months of silence, or worse, bitterness, I had trained myself not to expect much. Every envelope from the prison came like a warning. I would stare at the return address, hold my breath, and wonder if I had the strength to read more anger from the boy I still called my baby. But this time, the handwriting looked different. It was neater, slower, as if he took his time. I opened it with trembling fingers, prepared for more rejection, only to stop cold at the very first line. "Mom, I read the book you sent, and I prayed last night." I dropped the letter. My knees buckled. I sank to the floor, clutching that folded paper like it was the most precious thing I'd ever owned. And for the first time in so long, I didn't cry from grief. I cried from gratitude. From awe. From relief so deep it shook the very center of me. He prayed. My son prayed. He didn't tell me he'd found religion. He didn't fake repentance or write a list of things he thought I wanted to hear. He simply said that something in that little book, the one I had wrapped in tissue and mailed with a trembling hand months ago, reached him. It spoke to him. It stirred something in that hardened, angry heart. He said he couldn't explain it. He just felt not alone for the first time in a long time. And I knew with every fiber of my soul what that was. It was God. Not in a church pew, not in a sermon, but in a cold prison cell where the walls finally cracked just enough for the light to get in. I whispered, "Thank you, Jesus," over and over, rocking back and forth like a woman who had just witnessed resurrection. Because in a way, I had. My son wasn't gone. He wasn't lost. He wasn't unreachable. God had found him where I could not. And in that moment, I was reminded of something I had clung to through every sleepless night, every unanswered prayer, every slammed prison door. God is never late. He shows up right on time, especially in the dark. It was a rainy Thursday. I heard the knock just after sunset, soft, hesitant, like someone afraid of the answer. I opened the door, and there he was. Eric, thinner than I remembered. His once proud shoulders now slouched, his face drawn with lines I hadn't seen before. His eyes, those eyes I once fell in love with, were red, heavy, and filled with something I never thought I'd see in him again: remorse. He didn't speak right away. He just stood there on the porch, dripping wet, holding a small duffel bag in one hand, like a boy sent home from school. Then he whispered, "You're still wearing your ring." I didn't say anything. I looked down at my hand. Yes, the ring was still there. I had never taken it off, not out of hope, not out of weakness, but because somewhere deep inside me, it reminded me of who I used to be, before everything fell apart, of the promise I had made, even when he broke his. I should have slammed the door. I should have demanded an explanation. I should have screamed. But I didn't. I just stepped back. One step, and in silence he walked inside. The air between us was thick with years of pain, of betrayal, abandonment, humiliation. But as he stood there, hands trembling, eyes searching mine for something, anything, I realized the anger had left me long ago. What was left was grief. And underneath the grief was grace. I had already forgiven him, not because he deserved it, but because my faith demanded it. Because long before he ever asked to be let back in, I had laid his name at the feet of the cross. I had prayed for him, not for him to come back, but for his soul to come home. Now here he was, not the man who left, but the one who had been broken in the wilderness. We didn't say much that night. I didn't offer promises, and he didn't ask for them. We just sat in silence, two people scarred by the same storm. And as I looked at him across the table we once shared as a family, I realized something. God wasn't just healing me. He was healing us, one shattered piece at a time. It didn't happen right away. After Eric came home, there were still long silences, awkward dinners, nights when we didn't know what to say, and mornings when we tiptoed around each other like strangers learning to share space again. I forgave him. Yes, but forgiveness doesn't erase pain overnight. And Tyler? He was still in prison. But I kept writing, and he kept responding. His letters started to change. Less anger, more reflection. He asked questions about the verses I sent. He talked about chapel services, about a pastor who listened without judging him, about feeling something again, something he hadn't felt since he was a boy sitting in the back pew next to me. And then, one afternoon, I got the letter I had prayed 3 years for. "Mom, they're letting me out early. Good behavior. I want to come home." I read it 3 times, my hands shaking. My knees gave out the same way they did when he was arrested, but this time I fell in gratitude, not grief. Eric drove me to pick Tyler up. It was the quietest car ride of our marriage. But when Tyler walked out of those gates, his face thin, his eyes clearer, I saw a flicker of the boy I used to know. Not fully healed, not yet, but softer, humbled. When we got home, he hugged me first. Then, to my surprise, he turned to his father. And for a moment, I held my breath. But Tyler extended his hand. Eric took it. And just like that, the first crack of healing opened between them. A week later, Tyler asked if we could go to church. Not because I begged, not because I guilted him, but because he wanted to. So that Sunday, for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I sat in the middle of my husband and my son, one on each side. We weren't the same family we used to be, but maybe we were something stronger. When the music started, Tyler reached for my hand. Eric did too. We stood, three broken people held together by something bigger than any of us. And when the pastor invited anyone to come forward for prayer, my son, the boy who once screamed at me for sending him Bibles, walked up to the altar with tears in his eyes. I followed him. So did Eric. We knelt, we wept, we prayed. And in that moment, I knew. God had not only restored what was lost, He had rebuilt it. On faith, on grace, on mercy. Not all prayers are answered in the way or time we expect, but they are answered. Sometimes it just takes a prison, a porch light, and a mother who refuses to stop believing.